She thought she escaped, but nightmares have a way of finding you again. Soft footsteps echo in the background. A door creaks open. It had been months since she last saw him, months of silence, months of believing she was finally free. Heartbeat sound starts increasing, slow and tense. Until tonight. Because when she woke up at 3 a.m., there was a message on her phone. Notification sound. Ding! DY, text on screen. Miss me, sweetheart? Deep bass drop, followed by a chilling silence. And that's when she knew he was never really gone. Faint breathing sound in the background. Suspense music builds up. But this time, she wasn't going to run. This time, she was going to end it. Blinded by love, the beginning of a forever that wasn't meant to last. Emily had always believed in true love. And for years, she thought she had found it in Daniel. They had been inseparable since childhood. Best friends, soulmates, the kind of love people dream about. From the moment they met, there was an undeniable spark. Daniel wasn't just her boyfriend. He was her protector, her safe place, her entire world. And when he promised her forever, she believed him without question. You and me, Em. Always. She held on to those words like they were the most precious thing in the world. But what she didn't know, forever wasn't real. And sometimes the person you love the most becomes the person you fear the most. The perfect love story. Emily and Daniel's relationship was like a fairy tale. They did everything together. Late-night drives, spontaneous road trips, hours of talking about the future. He made her feel safe, wanted, loved. Daniel would always hold her close and whisper, "No one will ever love you like I do." And she believed it, because why wouldn't she? They had history, memories, promises. Nothing could break them, not time, not distance, not even fate. At least that's what Emily thought. But love has a way of turning blind, and sometimes, fairy tales don't get a happy ending. The marriage that changed everything. At 22, they stood at the altar, promising each other forever. Emily wore a white satin dress, eyes shining with love. Daniel held her hands, looking at her like she was his entire universe. "I vow to love you, protect you, and never let you go." It was the happiest day of her life, but she didn't realize. That same promise would one day feel like a prison sentence, the first sign of change. It started as small things. Daniel would get upset if Emily didn't text back fast enough. He didn't like when she went out alone. "I just want to keep you safe," he'd say. And Emily, she thought it was sweet. Because love means protecting each other, right? But love should never feel like control. And Daniel's love, it was starting to feel suffocating. The night that started it all. One evening, Emily was at a cafe, waiting for Daniel to pick her up. As she sipped her coffee, she heard a familiar voice. "Emily, is that really you?" She looked up. It was Lucas, an old childhood friend. "Lucas! Oh my God, it's been forever!" They laughed, catching up like old times, just two friends reminiscing. But across the street, Daniel saw. And in a single moment, his entire world shattered. Because in his mind, Emily wasn't just talking, she was betraying him. And that was unforgivable. Love turned to jealousy. That night, Daniel was silent. His usual warm touch, gone. His kisses, cold. Emily felt the shift. "Daniel, is something wrong?" she asked. "Who was he?" he finally said. "Who?" "The guy you were with today." Emily blinked. "Lucas." "He's an old friend," she laughed. But Daniel wasn't laughing. "And you just happened to run into him?" Emily frowned. "Daniel, it was just a coincidence. We were catching up. Catching up?" His voice dropped. Do I look stupid to you? Her chest tightened. Daniel, you're overreacting. I saw the way you smiled at him. Emily's breath hitched. I smile at everyone. Daniel stood up. Yeah? Maybe that's the problem. And just like that, something broke between them. The first fight that changed everything. After that night, Daniel's jealousy grew. He would check her phone, interrogate her about her day, doubt everything she said. And then one night, it went too far. Emily was laughing at a text from her friend. Daniel grabbed her phone. Who are you texting? Emily froze. Daniel, what's wrong with you? Answer me, Emily. Her heart dropped. It's just a group chat. Don't lie to me. His voice was dangerous now. Emily stepped back. Daniel, let's just talk. But before she could finish, his hand flew across her face. A loud slap echoed through the room. Emily stumbled back. Her cheek burned. Her heart shattered. For the first time, she looked at Daniela and didn't recognize him. His face went pale. Emily, She didn't wait. She grabbed her keys and walked out, leaving behind the man she once thought was her forever. But this was just the beginning. Daniel thought she would come back, that she would forgive him, that she would understand. But Emily had finally seen the truth. And once you see the truth, you can never unsee it. But Daniel wasn't going to let her go so easily. And soon Emily would learn that some loves don't end in heartbreak. Some loves end in destruction. And this was only the beginning. A love that left bruises. Emily sat in her car, staring at her reflection in the rearview mirror. Her cheek was still red, still burning, still carrying the weight of Daniel's hand. She touched it gently, her fingers trembling as if the memory itself could still hurt her. He hit me. The words felt unreal. Daniel, her Daniel. The same man who once kissed her forehead and promised to protect her. The same man who whispered, "I'll never hurt you," had just proven himself a liar. The war inside her heart. She should have driven away. She should have hated him, but instead, she sat there, frozen. Because no matter how much it hurt, she still loved him. And love? Love makes monsters look like men. Love makes pain feel like forgiveness. Love makes you wonder, maybe it was my fault. And that was the most dangerous thought of all. The apology that meant nothing. Her phone buzzed. She knew who it was. She knew before she even looked. DY. Daniel. Emily, please. Pick up. I didn't mean it. DY. Daniel. I love you. You know I do. DY. Daniel. Just come home, baby. We can fix this. Her hands shook. This was how it always went, wasn't it? First, the anger. Then the violence. Then the apology. And finally, the promise that it would never happen again. But it always did. Emily wanted to believe him, but deep down, she knew. This was just the beginning of the cycle. And if she let him pull her back in her, he would never let her go. The lie she wanted to believe. That night, she sat alone in a motel room, staring at her phone. DY. Daniel. I don't know what came over me, Emily. DY. Daniel. I was just scared of losing you. DY. Daniel. I love you too much. That's why I acted that way. Emily closed her eyes. She knew what he was doing. He was making himself the victim. He was making his violence sound like love. And the worst part? She wanted to believe him. Because believing him was easier than accepting the truth. That the man she loved was the same man who would destroy her. The day he found her. 3 days. That's how long she managed to stay away. 3 days of crying. 3 days of wrestling with her own heart. 3 days of trying to break free. And then, He found her. She was walking out of the motel, her suitcase in hand. And there he was, leaning against his car, watching her, waiting. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She should have turned around, she should have walked away, but instead, she froze, because even now, even after everything, part of her still wanted to run into his arms, the man who couldn't let go. "Emily," he whispered, stepping closer. His eyes were soft, sad, desperate. "Baby, I miss you." Her throat tightened. "Daniela." He reached out, gently touching her wrist. "Come home." Emily wanted to. God, she wanted to. But she looked at his hand. The same hand that once held hers like she was his whole world. The same hand that had struck her across the face. And suddenly, she saw the truth. She wasn't looking at the man she loved. She was looking at a man who would never let her be free. The final goodbye. Or was it? Emily took a deep breath. "I can't." Daniel's face darkened. "What do you mean, you can't?" "I'm leaving, Daniel." Silence. Then his grip tightened. "Emily, don't do this." Her heartbeat pounded in her ears. She knew if she hesitated, even for a second, he would pull her back in, so she ripped her arm away. "Goodbye, Daniel." And with that, she walked away, not looking back, not this time, because she knew if she turned around, she would never leave. And for the first time in years, she chose herself. But this wasn't the end. Daniel wasn't the type of man to accept defeat. And as he watched Emily disappear down the street, a dark, twisted smile formed on his lips. "You think you can walk away from me, Emily? You have no idea who you're dealing with. Because some love stories don't end with a goodbye. Some love stories end in tragedy. And for Emily, the worst was yet to come. Running away from a ghost. Emily thought leaving Daniel would bring peace, but peace never came. Because the thing about toxic love, it doesn't disappear overnight. She had moved into a new apartment, started a new job, and was trying to find herself again. But every time she closed her eyes, she could still hear his voice. "No one will ever love you like I do." She could still feel his grip on her wrist, still see the look in his eyes the night she left. She had escaped him physically, but emotionally, he was still everywhere. The first sign that he wasn't done. One night, Emily was heading home when her phone buzzed. "DY, unknown number. Do you miss me?" Her heart stopped. She knew who it was. She deleted the message, blocked the number. But the next day, DY. "Unknown number. I saw you today. You looked beautiful." Emily's blood ran cold. She turned, scanning the street. Nothing. But she could feel it. She was being watched. Daniel wasn't gone. He was still lurking in the shadows, the fear of moving on. Emily told herself she was fine, that Daniel couldn't hurt her anymore, that she had won, but deep inside, she felt hollow. Love wasn't supposed to feel like this. Love wasn't supposed to leave scars. And then one day, a stranger walked into her life, and for the first time in a long time, she felt something new. The man who made her smile again. His name was Ethan. He was kind, warm, and safe. And most importantly, he wasn't Daniel. They met by accident. A spilled coffee, a shared laugh, a simple moment that changed everything. "Are you okay?" he asked, offering her a napkin. Emily looked at him, really looked at him. For the first time in months, she saw softness instead of control. "Yeah," she whispered. "I think I am." And in that moment, for the first time since Daniel, she felt hope. But the past refused to stay buried. That night, Emily got another text. "DY, unknown number. Do you really think you can replace me?" Her chest tightened, her hands shook. She didn't reply. She didn't have to, because she already knew the truth. Daniel wasn't letting her go. And if he couldn't have her, no one could. The first warning. Emily walked into her apartment, still shaken from the text. She locked the door, checked the windows, breathed deeply. "It's just paranoia," she told herself. But then she saw it, a single red rose sitting on her kitchen counter. Her breath caught in her throat. She hadn't put it there. The apartment had been locked. She was alone, at least. She thought she was, and in that moment, she realized Daniel had been inside, and he had left a message. "I can still get to you, Emily." This wasn't over. Emily backed away, heart racing. Her safe place wasn't safe anymore. She needed help. She grabbed her phone and dialed the only person she could think of. "Ethan, I think someone's in my apartment." A pause. Then his voice, steady and calm. "Stay where you are. I'm coming." But what Emily didn't know was that Ethan was about to become part of the most dangerous game Daniel had ever played. Because this wasn't just about love anymore. This was about power, and Daniel wasn't done playing. The moment fear became real. Ethan arrived within minutes. Emily stood frozen by the door, her hands still shaking from the sight of that single red rose. Ethan took one look at her pale face and knew something was very wrong. "Emily, what happened?" She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Because how could she explain? How could she make him understand that no matter where she ran, Daniel would always find her? She simply turned and pointed to the rose on the counter. Ethan's expression darkened. "Did you leave your door unlocked?" Emily shook her head. Number I always double-check. "Then someone broke in." His voice was calm, steady, but Emily could see the tension in his jaw. "Did you call the police?" Emily let out a bitter laugh. "And tell them what? That my ex left me a flower?" Ethan frowned. "Emily, this isn't normal. This isn't okay." She knew that. She had always. But the police wouldn't help unless he actually hurt her. And by then, it would be too late. The lie she wanted to believe. Ethan insisted on staying the night, just to make sure she was safe. Emily wanted to say no. She wanted to prove to herself that she could handle this. But the truth, she wasn't sure if she could. So she let him stay. And for the first time in weeks, she fell asleep without fear. Because for the first time in weeks, she wasn't alone. And for a moment, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she was safe. She was wrong. Daniel's next move. The next morning, Emily woke up feeling lighter. She walked into the kitchen, half expecting to see Ethan still there. But instead, she saw something else. A note. Sitting exactly where the rose had been the night before. Her stomach dropped. With shaky fingers, she picked it up. And when she read the words, her entire world tilted. "You think he can protect you? You think anyone can? You belong to me, Emily. You always will." Emily's vision blurred. Her hands trembled. He had been here again, while she was sleeping, while Ethan was in the next room. He had walked into her home like he owned it, and he had left her a message, a warning. No matter where she ran, no matter who she trusted, Daniel was always watching. The panic that wouldn't stop. Emily's breath came in ragged gasps. She grabbed her phone, dialed Ethan's number. He picked up immediately. "Emily, what's wrong?" "He was here, Ethan." Her voice broke. "Last night, while we were sleeping." Silence. Then, a sharp inhale. "I'm coming back." Emily didn't argue, because for the first time, she was terrified of being alone. The breaking point. Ethan arrived within minutes. This time, he didn't ask. He didn't hesitate. He simply pulled her into his arms and held her while she shook. "We need to go to the police. They won't do anything. Then we'll make them listen." Emily wished she believed that, but deep down, she knew the truth. Daniel was smart. He never left proof, and even if he did, he always found a way to twist the story. He wasn't just a man. He was a shadow, one she could never escape, the moment she realized she wasn't safe. That night, Ethan stayed with her again. Emily should have felt safer, but something inside her felt worse. Like the walls were closing in, like Daniel was already planning his next move, and she was running out of time, so she stayed awake, listening, waiting, and then, at exactly 3:17 a.m., her phone buzzed. A text, DY, unknown number, look outside. Emily's blood ran cold. Her breath caught in her throat. She turned her head, heart slamming against her ribs. She didn't want to look, but she had to, slowly, with trembling fingers. She reached for the curtain, and when she pulled it back, her soul left her body. Daniel, standing outside, watching, waiting, smiling, like he had all the time in the world. Emily's screams shattered the silence. This wasn't just a game anymore. Ethan was at her side in seconds. "What is it? What happened?" She pointed, unable to breathe. But when Ethan looked at... Daniel was gone, like he had never been there, like he was just a figment of her nightmares. But Emily knew the truth. This wasn't just stalking anymore. This wasn't just a game. This was a warning, and if she didn't stop him soon, he was going to destroy her. The fear that became her reality. Emily didn't sleep that night, even after Daniel disappeared from the street, even after Ethan double-checked the locks, even after she tried to convince herself that she was safe. She wasn't, because she knew Daniel, and Daniel never gave up. He didn't just want her back, he wanted to own her, and until he did, he wouldn't stop. The decision that changed everything. The next morning, Ethan sat across from Emily at the kitchen table. "You can't stay here, Emily." She hugged her arms, staring at her untouched coffee. "If I leave, he wins." Ethan sighed. "And if you stay, he might kill you." Emily's stomach twisted. She had spent so much time pretending Daniel wasn't dangerous. But last night, when she saw him standing outside, smiling like he already won, she knew. This wasn't just obsession, this was possession. And Daniel wouldn't stop until she belonged to him again. The plan that might save her. "I need to go to the police," she whispered. Ethan exhaled, relieved. "Finally." But Emily shook her head. "Not to file a report, that won't do anything." She met Ethan's eyes. "I need a restraining order, something legally binding, so when he does something again, they have proof." Ethan nodded. "I'll come with you." Emily hesitated. "You don't have to." "I want to." And for the first time, she realized Ethan wasn't just someone trying to help. He cared. And for the first time since leaving Daniel, she didn't feel alone. The visit to the police station. The police station smelled like stale coffee and bad decisions. Emily sat across from a detective who looked tired of life. "You're saying he broke into your apartment?" "No," Emily said. "There were no signs of forced entry." The detective frowned. "So, he left you a flower?" Emily clenched her fists. "And a note. And he was standing outside my window at 3 a.m. The detective sighed. "Miss Carter, do you have any proof?" Emily's heart sank. Proof. Daniel was always so careful. No cameras, no witnesses, no evidence. "No," she admitted. The detective scribbled something down. "Without proof, we can't do much." Ethan leaned forward. "So, you're saying she has to wait until he actually hurts her before you help?" The detective hesitated. "We'll keep an eye on him, but a restraining order, Won't stop him if he really wants to find her. Emily's stomach twisted, because deep down, she already knew that. The warning. She couldn't ignore. Later that night, Emily stood in her apartment, staring at her reflection. Dark circles under her eyes, face pale from exhaustion, hands shaking from fear. She was tired of running, tired of looking over her shoulder, tired of being afraid. She turned to Ethan. "I need to end this." Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" She swallowed hard. "I need to face him, make him understand that I'm not coming back." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Emily, no. That's exactly what he wants." "Then what am I supposed to do? Wait until he finally loses control?" Ethan didn't answer, because they both knew her. That was exactly what was going to happen, Daniel's next move. That night, Emily stayed at Ethan's place, just in case, but even there, she wasn't safe. At 2:47 a.m., her phone buzzed. DY. "Unknown number. I know where you are, sweetheart." Emily's breath hitched. Her pulse roared in her ears. She turned off her phone, curled up in bed, prayed that for just one night, she could sleep without fear. She was wrong, the nightmare that wasn't a dream. Sometime during the night, Emily woke up to a noise, a soft, almost inaudible creak, like someone walking. Her chest tightened. She slowly turned toward Ethan, but he was still asleep. Then she heard it again. Footsteps. Inside the house. Emily's lungs froze. Number. No, no, no. This wasn't happening. She forced herself to breathe, to think. She reached for Ethan, gently shaking him awake. "Ethan." He stirred. "What?" "Someone's in the house." Ethan's eyes snapped open. They listened. Silence. Then another creak, this time closer. Emily's heart slammed against her ribs. Daniel was inside. And this time, he wasn't leaving a flower. He was coming for her, trapped with the devil. Ethan moved fast. He grabbed a baseball bat from under his bed, motioned for Emily to stay behind him. Then a shadow moved past the doorway. Emily gasped. Ethan lunged forward, but before he could reach the door, a voice stopped them cold. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Emily's blood ran cold. Daniel, standing in the doorway, smiling, like he owned the world, like he owned her. "Miss me, baby?" Emily couldn't breathe. She couldn't think, because in that moment, she knew this wasn't just a break-in. This was a final warning, and if she didn't stop him now, she never would, trapped with a monster. "Miss me, baby?" Daniel's voice sent a cold shiver down Emily's spine. He was standing in the doorway, smiling like he had already won, like he had never lost her at all. Ethan gripped the baseball bat tighter. "Get out," he said, his voice sharp, controlled. Daniel chuckled. "That's cute. You think you're in charge here?" Emily's heart hammered in her chest. Daniel's eyes were locked onto hers. "Did you really think a new man would save you, Emily?" Her throat went dry. Daniel took a step forward. Ethan raised the bat, ready to swing. Another step, and I swear to God, ow. Daniel held up his hands, mocking innocence. "Relax, hero. I'm just here to talk." His eyes flicked back to Emily. "Right, sweetheart." She didn't answer, because she knew this wasn't TMT, just about talking. This was his final warning, and if she didn't stop him tonight, she never would. A mind game she couldn't escape. "How did you get in?" Ethan demanded. Daniel smirked. "Oh, Ethan, do you really think locks can keep me away?" He tilted his head, his smile turning cruel. "You know, Emily, I almost admired it. You running, hiding, pretending you could escape me." His expression darkened. "But that's over now." Emily's blood ran cold. "You don't own me, Daniel." His eyes flashed. "Don't I?" Her hands shook. She knew this tone. She had heard it before, right before he lost control. And now she was trapped in a house with him, with nowhere left to run. The first strike. Daniel took another step forward. Ethan swung. The bat slammed into Daniel's arm. A sickening crack filled the air. Daniel stumbled back, cursing. Emily gasped, stepping away as Ethan moved between them. "Get out before I break something else," Ethan warned. Daniel's breathing was heavy, his face twisted in rage. But then he laughed, a slow, eerie chuckle that made Emily's stomach twist. "You think you're the first guy to try and protect her?" Daniel smirked. He wiped the blood from his lip. "They all fail in the end." His eyes locked onto Emily. "Because she always comes back to me." Emily shook her head. "Not this time." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Oh, sweetheart, don't lie to yourself." His voice dropped. "You still love me." Her heart twisted, because for the smallest fraction of a second, she almost believed him, and that terrified her more than anything. The past still had chains on her. Daniel took one more step, and this time Emily didn't move away. "You remember what we had, don't you?" he murmured. "I don't get it. All those nights you told me no one else could love you the way I do?" Emily's hands curled into fists. "That wasn't love, Daniel." His smile vanished. "Don't say that. It was control. It was obsession. It was fear." Daniel's entire body tensed. "Number, it was love." Emily shook her head. "Love doesn't hurt like this." Daniel's face twisted in rage. "You don't get to decide what love is, Emily." He lunged. This time, Ethan wasn't fast enough. The breaking point. Daniel grabbed Emily's arm, yanking her toward him. "You're mine." Emily fought, struggled, but Daniel was strong, stronger than she remembered. He pulled her closer, his fingers digging into her skin. "Let go of me!" she screamed. But Daniel didn't. And then Ethan tackled him. Both men crashed to the floor, punches thrown, blood spilled. Emily stood frozen until she saw the knife. Daniel's knife, shining under the kitchen light, lying just inches away. And in that moment, she knew. She had to end this. Now, the moment she took back control. She lunged, her fingers wrapped around the cold steel. She turned, and Daniel was already on his feet. He reached for her, and she did the only thing she could. She raised the knife and drove it into his shoulder. Daniel stumbled back, gasping, his eyes wide in shock. Blood seeped through his shirt. He fell to the floor, gripping the wound. For the first time, Emily saw something in his eyes she had never seen before. Fear, or undeniable. "You stabbed me," he whispered, almost in disbelief. Emily didn't blink. "And if you ever come near me again, Daniel, I won't miss next time." Daniel's breath hitched, because this wasn't the Emily he knew. This wasn't the girl who used to forgive him, who used to believe his lies. This was someone else, someone who had nothing left to fear. And for the first time, Daniel was the one afraid, the end of his reign. Sirens screamed in the distance. The police, finally. Ethan, battered and bloody, stumbled to his feet. Daniel tried to move, but Emily stepped forward, pressed the knife against his throat. "Don't." Daniel froze. She had power now, for the first time in their entire relationship. She had the power, and Daniel had lost everything. The arrest. The cops stormed in. Daniel was dragged away, screaming, thrashing, but powerless. His voice echoed through the house. "You think this is over, Emily?" Emily exhaled, for the first time in years. She felt free. She turned to Ethan. He looked at her, bruised but smiling. "Are you okay?" he asked. Emily took a deep breath, and for the first time in a long time, she meant it when she answered, "Yeah, I think I am." But Was it really over? Some love stories end in heartbreak, some end in violence. And some never really end at all, because even behind bars and mouth, Daniel still believed one thing: you're mine, Emily. And if he ever got out, he was coming back for her. A life after Daniel, or so she thought. Daniel was gone, finally locked away where he belonged. Emily should have felt free. She should have been able to breathe again, sleep again, live again. But the truth? She didn't, because fear doesn't disappear overnight. Every time she walked home alone, she felt his eyes on her. Every time her phone buzzed, her heart skipped a beat. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard his voice. "You're mine, Emily." And that was a wound no court sentence could erase, trying to pick up the pieces. Emily did everything she could to rebuild herself. She moved into a new apartment. She started therapy. She got a new job, one that didn't remind her of him. Slowly, she started to feel normal again. She made new friends. She went on dates. She smiled out for real this time. And for the first time in a long, long time, she started to believe that maybe, just maybe, she had won. Until the day she got the phone call. The nightmare wasn't over. Emily was making coffee when her phone rang. She almost didn't answer. But when she saw the caller ID, her stomach dropped. Unknown number. A familiar fear crawled up her spine. She hesitated. Then she picked up. "Hello?" Silence. Her fingers tightened around the phone. "Who is this?" And then, a voice she never thought she'd hear again. "Miss me, Emily?" Her blood ran cold. Daniel. She couldn't breathe. "You're supposed to be in jail," she whispered. Daniel chuckled. "Well, sweetheart, it looks like I got out early." Emily's world spun. This wasn't possible. This wasn't happening. "You're lying." "Check the news," Daniel murmured. Her hands shaking, she grabbed her laptop, typed his name into the search bar, and then, her heart stopped. Breaking news: Daniel Knox released after appeal win. Emily felt sick. Daniel was free. He was out there. And now, he was coming back for her. The chase begins again. Emily hung up the phone. Her breath came in ragged gasps. Her hands shook. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. She had fought. She had won. She had escaped. But Daniel was never going to let her go. And this time, she wasn't sure if she'd survive it. Because the last time he wanted to own her. But now he wanted revenge. A shadow that wouldn't leave. Emily tried to tell herself she was safe, that he wouldn't dare come near her, that the law would protect her. But the next morning, when she opened her door, she saw it, a single red rose, sitting on her doorstep, with a note. "Round 2, sweetheart." Her breath shattered, because she knew, Daniel wasn't just coming back. He was already here, the return of the monster. The single red rose sat on her doorstep, mocking her. The note curled at the edges from the morning breeze. "Round 2, sweetheart." Emily's hands shook as she picked it up. Her breath hitched. He was here, not in some faraway place, not hiding behind a screen. Here, watching her, waiting. And now? It was only a matter of time. The call for help. Her fingers fumbled with her phone. She called the only person who could help her now. Ethan. He picked up on the first ring. "Emily?" His voice was sharp, alert. She tried to speak, but her throat felt like it was closing. "He's back," she finally whispered. A pause. Then the sound of movement. "I'm coming over." And then, just before he hung up, "Lock your doors, now." Emily didn't need to be told twice. The feeling of being watched. She bolted inside, slamming the door, locking it, checking the windows. Again and again and again. But no matter how many times she checked, she couldn't shake the feeling. The feeling that she was already too late. Ethan's warning. 20 minutes later, Ethan stormed into her apartment. His eyes scanned the room, searching for something for him. "Tell me everything." Emily handed him the note. He read it. His jaw clenched. "I should have killed him when I had the chance," Ethan muttered. Emily let out a shaky breath. "What do I do?" Ethan didn't answer right away. Then, his eyes met hers. "You run." Her stomach dropped. "I can't." "Emily, if he got out this fast, that means he has power, he has connections, and he won't stop this time." She already knew that, but she also knew, if I run, he wins. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Then we end this, for good." The trap she didn't see coming. That night, Emily tried to sleep, tried to pretend everything was okay, tried to convince herself Daniel was still far away. But at exactly 2:58 a.m., she woke up. A sound, a whisper, her name. Emily shot up in bed, heart pounding, breath heavy. She grabbed her phone and her stomach dropped. A message. DUI. Unknown number. Sweet dreams, baby. A photo attachment. Her, sleeping. Emily's hands went cold. She was alone in her apartment. The door was locked. The windows were locked. So how did he get in? And then she saw it. Her closet door slightly open. Her heart stopped. Because she knew she wasn't alone, not anymore. The face of the devil. Her breath shook as she reached for the lamp. Slowly, softly. She stood up, moved toward the closet. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the handle. She could hear her own heartbeat. Loud, fast, terrified. She yanked the door open, and there he was. Daniel, standing there, smiling, like he had been waiting for this moment forever. "Took you long enough to find me, sweetheart." Emily screamed. "The struggle for survival!" Daniel lunged. Emily fought. She shoved him, ran for the door, but he was faster. He grabbed her, slamming her into the wall. "You thought you could escape me," he hissed. She struggled, kicked, scratched. But Daniel was stronger, his hand wrapped around her throat. Tight. Too tight. "You're mine, Emily. You always were." Her vision blurred, her lungs burned. She reached for something, anything. Her fingers closed around a glass vase. With the last bit of strength she had left, she smashed it over his head. Daniel stumbled back. Dazed, Emily gasped for air, and she ran, the escape, for now. She didn't stop running, didn't stop until she was outside, screaming for help. Lights turned on, doors opened, people ran out. But by the time anyone got inside, Daniel was gone, vanished, like a ghost, like he was never really there at all. This wasn't over. The police came, took her statement, checked her apartment, but there was no sign of forced entry, no evidence he had been there, no proof, just like before. "We'll increase patrols in your area," the officer promised. Emily nodded, but deep down, she knew the truth. Daniel wasn't done. He'd gotten in once, he could do it again. And next time, he wouldn't let her escape. The beginning of the final battle. The next day, Ethan packed her bags. "We're leaving, Emily." "Where?" "Somewhere safe." But Emily had had enough of running. She met his eyes. "No," Ethan frowned. Emily Dash. "I'm done being afraid." Ethan stared at her for a long moment. Then, he nodded. "Then we fight." Because now, it wasn't about surviving Daniel. It was about ending him for good. No more running. Emily had spent months running, months living in fear, months looking over her shoulder, waiting for Daniel to strike. But now, she was done. She wasn't a victim anymore. This time, Daniel was the one who needed to be afraid. The plan to end this. Ethan paced the room. "Emily, are you sure about this?" She clenched her jaw. "I dunno, it might have a choice, Ethan. We could still leave and spend the rest of my life running." She shook her head. "Number I have to stop him." Ethan sighed. "Okay, but we do this my way." Emily folded her arms. "Which is?" "We set a trap." Emily's stomach twisted because she knew this was dangerous. But she also knew it was the only way, luring the devil out of the shadows. Daniel was always watching, always waiting, so Emily gave him exactly what he wanted. She pretended to be afraid. She let him believe he had won. She went about her day as if she was breaking down, checking over her shoulder, jumping at shadows, leaving her doors unlocked, and just like they predicted, Daniel took the bait the night he came back. It was 2:46 a.m. when it happened. A soft click at the door. Emily held her breath. Her fingers tightened around the knife in her hand. Footsteps, software careful. He was inside. Her pulse roared in her ears. Then, a shadow moved past the hallway. She saw him, Daniel, and this time, she wasn't afraid. The final confrontation. Daniel walked toward the bedroom, his steps slow, deliberate. He reached for the doorknob, turned it. The door swung open, and Emily was waiting. She stepped forward, knife raised. Daniel froze. For the first time, he looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something different. "What's wrong, Daniel?" Emily's voice was calm. "Not the weak little girl you remember?" Daniel gritted his teeth. "You think you can fight me?" He scoffed. Emily didn't blink. "No, Daniel!" She took a slow step forward. "I think I can kill you." The fight for her life. Daniel lunged. Emily dodged. She slashed the knife across his arm. Daniel hissed in pain. But he didn't stop. He grabbed her by the hair, yanking her back. Emily fought, kicked, scratched, but Daniel was strong. And for a terrifying moment, she thought he was going to win. Until a loud crack filled the air. Daniel's body jerked, his grip loosened, and then he collapsed. Ethan stood behind him, holding a gun. His hands were shaking, his breathing heavy. Emily stared at Daniel's motionless body. Then a soft, weak laugh escaped her lips. "We did it." Or so she thought. Ethan slowly lowered the gun. "Is he—" Emily took a deep breath. She stepped forward, looked down at Daniel. His chest rose, fell. He was still breathing. Emily's hands curled into fists. Not for long. She reached for the knife outfit, ready to finish it. But then, Daniel's eyes snapped open, and he smiled. "You can't kill me, Emily," he whispered. Her blood ran cold. "I'll always come back for you." And then, the police siren screamed in the distance. This was it. The end, or was it? The moment she thought it was over. The sirens grew louder. Emily's hands shook. Daniel was on the ground, blood seeping through his shirt, yet his lips still curled into that same twisted smile. "You can't get rid of me, Emily." His voice was weak, but his words, they were stronger than ever. "I'll always be with you." Emily's stomach twisted, because deep down she knew he wasn't just talking about this moment. He was talking about forever. The arrest that should have brought peace. The police rushed in, guns drawn. "Step away!" one of them shouted. Ethan slowly lifted his hands, the gun still warm in his grip. Emily stood frozen, or watching as two officers grabbed Daniela TM's arms and hauled him to his feet. Blood dripped from his shoulder. His face was pale, but his eyes never left hers. "Emily," he whispered. A shiver ran down her spine. "Don't worry, sweetheart. We'll see each other again." And with that, they dragged him away. out of her life. Or at least, that's what she wanted to believe. When the silence feels the loudest, Emily sat in Ethan's apartment, staring at her reflection in the mirror, bruised, exhausted, but alive. She should have felt relieved, but she didn't. Because peace doesn't come instantly, because fear doesn't vanish overnight, because Daniel was gone, but the scars he left behind, they were still there. The healing that comes slowly. The days passed, then weeks, then months, and slowly, Emily learned how to breathe again. She moved to a new city. She started therapy. She began writing about her experience, hoping her story could help others. And one day when she looked in the mirror, she didn't see a victim anymore. She saw a survivor, stronger, wiser, free. Or so she thought. The last message. It was a quiet evening. Emily was making tea when her phone buzzed. An unknown number. Her breath hitched. Her fingers hesitated before opening the message. There were only 4 words. "Miss me, sweetheart?" Emily's heart stopped. Her hands shook. She turned, looking out the window. Nothing. But the fear, it was back, because she knew. Some ghosts never die, and some nightmares never really end. The end, or a new beginning.